Hello everyone, I'm Ethys, and today I would like to talk about Gelmorra. The Eorzean landscape is littered with the ruins of empires long gone, each a testament to the cycle of the ages and the nigh inevitable hubris of mortals. Of these we know the Allagans best. Most of us have spent much of the past 18 months quite literally in their shoes. We're also familiar by now to a lesser extent with the Nimians of Vilbrand, the Amdapori, the Dragons of Mericidia, and as of the latest Hildebrand episode we have some passing knowledge of the Sildir, Uldal's sister state born of the fracturing Beladaya. I'll be making a video on the Sildir in the near future, but what I want to talk about today is what I feel to be the least recognized of the ancient Eorzean civilizations, Gelmorra. Gelmorran ruins in the Shroud are often overlooked because in both material and architecture they closely resemble those of the Amdapori, albeit a little slapdash, plebeian, and of course mostly underground. There is, however, quite a compelling reason for this. We know that the Amdapori were involved in the War of the Magi, and that their golden age was thoroughly decapitated by the appearance of Diabolos, whom Esumiyan believes to have been summoned by necromantic enemies of the state, but I suspect we may yet find that the Amdapori summoned him themselves in an attempt to harness his power in a similar way to the Allagans' entrapment of Bahamut or their dealings with the Cloud of Darkness. In any case, we know that Diabolos crippled the city and its resources, and shortly thereafter, the War of the Magi culminated in a great flood that ushered in the 6th Umbral Era. We know that the use of magic was widely forbidden across Eorzea during this Umbral Era, and it was at this point that the elementals of the Twelveswood would no longer suffer to accept mankind, and the Shroud very quickly became an impossibly dangerous and hostile place for them to live. The denizens of the Shroud were literally forced underground, and the subterranean cities of Gelmorra grew to accommodate Elazin and Hior alike. It is probable that the founders of Gelmorra were in fact the few surviving citizens of Amdapor, and having weathered the wrath of Diabolos, a realm-wide flood, and their very homeland turning against them, they quickly stripped enough stone from their ruined homes to shore themselves up in underground caves that must have felt to them like fallout shelters. We can imagine that the panic and despair of many have faced during our own calamity was near a perfect painting of the last Amdapori. But unlike our own fortune, their desolate condition would not relent. Born in the dappled sun of the Twelveswood, they would toil and die many malms underground. After a time, they would carefully and painstakingly scavenge whatever materials they could from their broken civilization without having to venture too far or too long above ground, and concurrently dig in inch by inch until they had begun to create some damp and bohemian visage of home. The children of these survivors would adapt and gradually flourish, extending these caves into underground networks which would slowly appropriate their Amdapor-derived aesthetic into something more pragmatic and organic, burrowing in all directions and seemingly chaotic patterns, blending in and out of the native rock as they spread over time. Taking to mining, these now Gelmorrans would soon outgrow their reliance on materials from the surface, and it would become uncommon for anyone to ever need to venture into the vicious Shroud. Their own unique culture would germinate in near complete exclusion from the rest of Eorzea, and generations would live and die in the darkness. The more prominent Gelmorran sites that we know of include the Montoy Cellars, the Tamtara Deepcroft, the partially excavated residential district of Isolmhar, and the Gelmorra ruins in the North Shroud that are often speculated to be some kind of door or entrance to a district of the city. Most of us know more about the Gelmorrans than we realize. We have in fact fought one of their ancient kings, Galvanth the Dominator, reanimated in the form of a void scent in the same manner as Avir in the Deepcroft. Like I say, the construction of these places appears to be Neo-Amdapori, and the timing of the fall of Amdapor and establishment of Gelmorra leaves no real doubt regarding the general origins of the latter. Sometime after the first millennium of the 6th Astral Era, in any case many centuries following the Great Flood, some Gelmorrans began to emerge, reaching out to the elementals, subsequently conceiving the discipline of conjury, birthing the Pajal and founding the state of Gridania. The cities of Gelmorra, however, remained populated for a long time. It is likely that some small populations of Duskwhite continue to live below the roots and stone of the Twelveswood. The Duskwhite themselves are perhaps the most underrepresented of the races of Eorzea, both in number and literature, but we do know that they constituted a large population of Gelmorra, and that in the present day they are often vagrant or at least avoid the cities in preference for the wild shroud. Despite having no real understanding of their origins or folklore as an Eorzea subspecies, I believe there are things we might posit about them from the fall of Amdapor and the rise of Gelmorra. The Duskwhite are of course based on the fantasy archetype of the Dark Elf, and in most worlds or franchises in which they feature, they share a common origin with their fairer cousins, but at some point in history suffer some great tragedy that cripples their numbers, inspires a withdrawn and brooding nature almost to the man, and alters their physiology so much that they become henceforth considered a subcategory. Just an example, in the Elder Scrolls franchise, the Kaima Tribunal tapped the heart of Lorkhan to grant themselves power, and their patron Azura transformed them for their sacrilege and hubris into the ashen-skinned Dunmer. I do not suggest something so dramatic for the Duskwhite, although it is possible that they were perhaps tainted by Diabolos, but I believe that this same convention inspired their development. The Eor did not begin to migrate to Eorzea until about 600 years after the 6th Umbral Calamity, so several centuries after the fall of Amdapor. This suggests to me that the Amdapori were an exclusively Eorzea people, and that no Eor would be found in Gelmorra until long after its establishment. The Duskwhite, then, are the only surviving children of Amdapor, and their physical distinctions are either owed to their ancestors possessing and passing on genetic traits that allow them to survive in the harsh condition of those first centuries underground, or of this same span of time somehow altering their ethereal composition. In any case, by the time Eors began to arrive in the Twelveswood, they would have found Gelmorra infinitely more livable and inviting than the conditions of its founders, and by this time the Eorzea that lived within had grown pale, dark, and stoic. When the Conjurers began to appease the elementals, some Duskwhite migrated to Gridania or north into Coerthas, but this was really only a few hundred years ago, and like I say, it is quite likely that some Gelmorran infrastructure is still used by Duskwhite today. Some recent data mining seems to have suggested that Heavensward will expand the accessible regions of the Shroud westward. And I, for one, hope to learn a great deal more about Gelmorra and the Duskwhite during the 3.0 series, and I half expect to be visiting a Duskwhite community such as those I've been describing in the near future. But that's all I have for you today. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope I provoked some thought. If you want to challenge or supplement my ideas, please leave a comment below, subscribe for regular content, tell your FC mates about me. I'm also on Twitter now, so if you'd like to follow me at Ethys FFXIV, message me here or there or on Reddit or in-game if you have any requests or just want to say hi. But for now, thanks again, take care, and sweet dreams.